The Duke returned from war to his remote estate, only to find a mourning widow, and a child who trembled as he whispered the Duke's name. The road to Greymont House had become a scar on the landscape. Dominic Voss rode along it as dusk thickened into proper night, his horse picking through overgrown ruts with the careful distrust of an animal that sensed its rider's uncertainty. 6 years had passed since he'd last traveled this path. 6 years of mud and blood and the kind of exhaustion that settled into bone. The war had ended 8 months ago, but Dominic had not returned then. He'd lingered in Portsmouth, then London, moving through rented rooms like a man postponing a diagnosis he already knew would be fatal. He was back now not because he'd healed but because he'd run out of road. The estate emerged through bare November trees the way a shipwreck surfaces at low tide. Massive, ruined, inevitable. Greymont House stood 3 stories of grey stone, its windows dark as empty sockets. Ivy had claimed the east wing. The fountain in the circular drive held nothing but dead leaves and rainwater. Dominic dismounted slowly, his left leg protesting. A reminder from Ba the Hoss. There were others, written in scars across his ribs and back, but the leg was the one that spoke up in cold weather, as if his body needed to announce its damage before he could forget. He'd dismissed the staff before he left. Couldn't pay them, didn't see the point. The house had been dying even then, its coffers emptied by his father's debts and his own mistakes. Now it was a monument to abandonment. Fitting, he thought. He'd come to sell it, sever the last tie to a name that felt like a noose and be done. The front door stood slightly ajar. Dominic's hand moved to his side before he remembered he no longer carried a sidearm. Old instinct sharp as ever. He pushed the door wider with his boot. The hinges groaned. Inside, the entrance hall should have been pitch dark, thick with the smell of mold and neglect. Instead, candlelight flickered from somewhere deeper in the house. His heartbeat steadied into the slow, deliberate rhythm that had kept him alive through ambushes and night raids. Someone was here. Squatters, perhaps. Thieves stripping what little remained. He moved through the hall without sound, his eyes adjusting. The furniture was still shrouded, but the floor had been swept. There was a faint smell. Bread? Something cooked, warm, utterly wrong for a house that should be as dead as the men he'd left in Spanish fields. Then he heard it, a child's laugh, bright and brief, cut short by a woman's hushed voice. Dominic froze at the base of the stairs. Impossible. He took them 2 at a time, his bad leg protesting, moving toward the sound. It came from the 2nd floor, from the east wing. From William's room. The door was open. Candlelight spilled across the threshold. Dominic stopped just outside, his breath shallow, and looked in. A woman knelt beside the bed, her back to him, dark hair pinned in a loose knot. She leaned over a small figure buried under blankets. A boy, no more than 7 or 8, his face flushed and damp. The child clutched a wooden horse, its paint chipped. His voice was thin, stretched with fever. Will the Duke's ghost come tonight, Mama? Hush, Thomas. There are no ghosts here. But Mrs. Hadley said. Mrs. Hadley talks too much. The woman's voice was firm but gentle, the kind of tone that held fear at bay through sheer will. She dipped a cloth into a basin and pressed it to the boy's forehead. You're safe. I promise. Dominic stepped into the room. You shouldn't make promises you can't keep. The woman spun, rising to her feet in one swift motion, positioning herself between him and the child. Her face was pale, angular, with the kind of beauty that came from endurance rather than ease. Her eyes, dark, sharp, fixed on him with immediate suspicion. Who are you? She demanded. I could ask you the same. Dominic's voice came out harder than he intended, scraped raw by disuse and the shock of finding his dead brother's room occupied. But I already know the answer. You're trespassing. I'm renting. She didn't retreat. If anything, she seemed to grow taller. I paid 6 months in advance. £40. I have the keys and the contract. From whom? A Mr. Pritchard. He said the house was available, that the owner... She stopped, studying him more carefully now. The candlelight caught the lines of his face, the gauntness, the uniform coat he hadn't bothered to change out of. You're him. You're the Duke of Voss. It wasn't a question. Dominic didn't confirm or deny. He was too busy calculating. £40. 6 months ago, his solicitor had sent an unexpected sum with a vague note about rental income. Dominic had spent it on lodging and drink without asking questions, desperate not to think about Greymont or what he'd left behind. Someone had taken advantage of his absence. Pritchard. The name rang a faint bell, some local agent, opportunistic and slippery. The man had clearly rented out a property he had no right to touch, pocketing the money while Dominic rotted in his own guilt 100 miles away. The contract's worthless, Dominic said finally. Pritchard had no authority. That's not my fault. No. But it's not my problem either. Behind her the boy, Thomas, whimpered. His breathing was labored, rattling in his small chest. The woman glanced back just for a second, and in that flicker of distraction, Dominic saw the truth. She was terrified. Not of him exactly. Of what losing this place would mean. Please. The word came out quietly, almost bitten off, as if she despised having to say it. Just tonight. He's fevered. The roads are too dark and I don't know where else. One night, Dominic interrupted. He didn't want to hear her beg. Didn't want to feel the weight of it. In a week, the house will be assessed for sale. You'll need to be gone by then. Her jaw tightened, but she nodded. Thank you. Dominic turned to leave, then paused. There's mint in the garden. East side, near the old gate. Brew it for his chest. He left before she could respond, descending the stairs with the uncomfortable awareness that he'd just made a decision he didn't fully understand. He should have sent them out immediately, consequences be damned. Instead, he found himself walking through the dark garden, his boots crunching over frost-stiff grass, searching for a plant he wasn't sure still existed. It did. Stubborn and wild, growing in the shadow of the wall. He pulled a handful, the scent sharp on his hands, and carried it back inside. Upstairs, the woman, Amelia he would learn, stood in the doorway of William's room, watching him with an expression he couldn't read. He handed her the mint without a word. Why? She asked. Dominic didn't have an answer. Or maybe he did, and it was too raw to speak aloud, because a child's labored breathing sounded too much like dying and he was tired of hearing it. He walked away before she could ask again. That night, he lay in his father's old room, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house creak and settle around him. Somewhere above, the boy coughed. Dominic closed his eyes and saw Spanish hills slick with rain, his brothers laughed the morning before the hunt, the way William's body had looked. He opened his eyes. No sleep tonight. There never was. But the house, for the first time in 6 years, was not empty. And Dominic Voss, who had come home to bury the past, found himself wondering if he'd just unearthed something he wasn't ready to face. Morning arrived with the smell of bread. Dominic woke to it, or rather, he surfaced from the shallow, restless state that passed for sleep these days. For a moment he remained perfectly still, disoriented by the scent. Warm, yeasty, utterly domestic. It didn't belong in Greymont. Nothing warm belonged here. He rose stiffly, his leg aching from the cold that had settled into the room overnight. The fireplace was dead. He hadn't bothered to light it. Punishment or indifference, he wasn't sure which. He dressed in yesterday's clothes, splashed icy water on his face from the basin, and made his way downstairs. The kitchen was at the back of the house, a cavernous space he'd avoided even as a child. It had been his mother's domain once, then the cook's, then no one's. Now, impossibly, it was alive. Amelia Crane stood at the old work table, her sleeves rolled to her elbows, flour dusting her forearms. 2 loaves sat cooling on a cloth. She was cutting a third, steam rising from the interior. The boy, Thomas, sat on a stool nearby, wrapped in a blanket, his color better than it had been the night before. He held a piece of bread with both hands, nibbling cautiously. She looked up when Dominic entered. No smile, no warmth. Just acknowledgement. There's tea, she said, nodding toward the kettle on the stove. And bread if you want it. Dominic hadn't expected hospitality. Hadn't expected her to still be here, truth be told. He'd half imagined waking to find them gone, the house returned to its proper state of emptiness. You didn't have to, he said. I know. She set down the knife, wiped her hands on her apron. Consider it payment for the mint. And the night. He poured himself tea, the cup chipped but clean. The first sip was strong, bitter, exactly what he needed. He leaned against the doorframe, watching her work. She moved with the kind of efficiency that came from necessity, no wasted motion. Everything about her suggested a woman who'd learned to survive on limited resources. How is he? Dominic asked, gesturing toward Thomas. Better. The fever broke an hour before dawn. She glanced at her son, and for just a moment, her expression softened. The mint helped. Thomas looked up at Dominic with wide eyes, gray like his mother's. There was curiosity there, but also wariness. The boy had been taught to be careful around strangers. Are you really a duke? Thomas asked suddenly. Thomas, Amelia began, but Dominic raised a hand. I am. Do you have a sword? Not anymore. Did you fight in the war? Yes. The boy considered this solemn. My papa fought too. He didn't come back. The silence that followed was sharp enough to draw blood. Amelia's hands stilled on the bread. Dominic set down his cup. "I'm sorry," he said and meant it. She nodded once, not looking at him. "It's been 8 months. 8 months. The war had ended 8 months ago, which meant her husband had died near the end, or perhaps just after. One of the final casualties when everyone thought the worst was over. Dominic knew that arithmetic intimately. Knew how the last deaths were always the cruelest, stripped of even the cold comfort of purpose. "How did you end up here?" he asked. Amelia hesitated. She wrapped the remaining bread carefully, buying herself time. When she spoke, her voice was measured, controlled. "My husband's family, they had expectations. His brother Gerald, she stopped, choosing her words with visible care. He believed I should remain in their household. Under his protection. When I made it clear that wasn't acceptable, things became difficult. I needed somewhere he wouldn't think to look. Somewhere remote." Dominic heard what she wasn't saying. The way she positioned herself between him and Thomas last night. The tension in her shoulders even now. Gerald wasn't just persistent. He was dangerous. "And Pritchard convinced you this place was safe," Dominic said. "He said it had been empty for years. That the owner was unlikely to return." She met his eyes then, direct and unflinching. "He lied about the second part, clearly. But he was right about the first." The accusation landed cleanly. Dominic didn't deny it. What could he say? That he'd fled his own life and left Greymont to rot? That he'd spent 6 years trying to outrun the memory of his brother's death, only to find it waiting for him in every empty room? "I came back to sell it," he said instead. "The estate agent arrives next week to assess the property. I need the house empty for that. So we have a week." "You have a week." Amelia's jaw tightened, but she nodded. "Then we'll be gone in 6 days. I won't give you cause to throw us out." Thomas made a small sound of protest. "But Mama, you said we could stay." "Plans change, darling." Her voice was gentle but firm. "We'll find somewhere else." The boy's face crumpled. He didn't cry, but his disappointment was palpable. He set down his bread, appetite vanished. Dominic felt something twist in his chest. Guilt, probably. Or the memory of what it felt like to be a child and have your world upended without explanation. 6 days, he repeated, more to himself than to them. You'll have time to make arrangements." "Yes." Amelia turned back to her work, dismissing him. "Thank you for your generosity, Your Grace." The title sounded like an insult in her mouth. Dominic left his tea unfinished and walked out. The house felt different in daylight. Dominic spent the morning moving through rooms he'd tried to forget, cataloging the damage. The library ceiling had a spreading stain, roof leak probably. The drawing room shutters hung crooked. In the ballroom, sections of parquet had buckled from moisture. Everywhere he looked, he saw evidence of neglect. His neglect. He ended up in the portrait gallery, staring up at his family's faces. His father, stern and distant even in oil paint. His mother, who died when he was 12. And William. William, painted at 20, just a year before the accident. Bright-eyed, laughing, captured mid-gesture as if the artist had asked him a question and he was about to answer. Dominic had loved his younger brother with the fierce, uncomplicated devotion of an older sibling who'd never had to compete for anything. When their father died, Dominic had inherited the title and the debts. William had inherited freedom. They'd gone hunting to celebrate William's 21st birthday. Dominic's idea. Dominic's route. Dominic's pace. The ravine had been hidden by morning fog. William's horse had gone over before anyone could react. Dominic closed his eyes against the memory, but it came anyway. The sound. The silence after. "You loved him." He spun. Amelia stood in the doorway, Thomas beside her. She wasn't looking at Dominic. She was looking at William's portrait. "I can tell," she continued quietly, "the way this room is maintained. Everything else is falling apart, but these paintings, they're clean. Dusted. You came back for them, didn't you? Before you left." Dominic's throat felt tight. "I should have taken them down." "Why?" "Because I don't deserve to look at him." The confession escaped before he could stop it. Amelia studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "Grief doesn't care about deserving," she said finally. "It just is." Thomas tugged at his mother's skirt. "Mama, can I explore?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Stay on this floor. Don't touch anything." The boy darted off, his earlier disappointment forgotten in the prospect of adventure. His footsteps echoed down the corridor. Amelia moved closer to the portrait of William. "He looks kind." He was. What happened? Dominic could have refused to answer. Should have. Instead, he found himself speaking. Hunting accident. 6 years ago. I organized it. Chose the route. He died because I wasn't careful enough. The words tasted like ash. I left for the war 2 months later. Told myself it was duty. Really, I just couldn't stay in the house where I'd killed him. You didn't kill him. I led him there. That's not the same thing. Amelia's voice was sharp now, cutting through his self-flagellation. Accidents are called accidents because no one chooses them. You think carrying guilt makes you honorable? It doesn't. It just makes you upset. Dominic stared at her. You don't know. I know what it's like to lose someone and convince yourself it's your fault. Her eyes blazed. I know what it's like to run. And I know that running doesn't actually take you anywhere. You just end up tired and still exactly where you started. Before he could respond, a crash echoed from deeper in the house, followed by Thomas's frightened cry. They both ran. They found him in the music room, standing amid shattered glass. One of the tall windows had a broken pane, and Thomas had apparently gotten too close. Blood welled from a small cut on his palm. I'm sorry. The boy was shaking, tears streaming down his face. Amelia swept him up, checking the wound. It's all right, darling. It's just a scratch. But Thomas was inconsolable, his breath coming in panicked gasps. I broke the Duke's window. Hey. Dominic knelt in front of him, making himself level with the child's eyes. Listen to me. It's just glass. It can be replaced. But You're more important than glass. Dominic said it firmly, meaning it. Let's get that hand wrapped, all right? He led them to the kitchen, found clean cloth, and bandaged Thomas's palm with the kind of steady competence he'd learned in field hospitals. The boy calmed gradually, hiccuping into silence. Amelia watched Dominic's hands as he worked. You've done this before. Too many times. When he finished, Thomas whispered, Thank you. Dominic nodded, something unfamiliar stirring in his chest. Not quite redemption. But perhaps the faintest possibility of it. Outside, the wind picked up. Rain began to fall, drumming against the windows. The storm was coming. The rain came down like a siege. By afternoon, it had transformed from a steady drizzle into a relentless assault. Water sheeted down the windows of Greymont House, turning the world beyond into a blur of gray. The temperature dropped. Dominic moved through the ground floor, checking shutters and placing buckets under the leaks he knew would come. The house groaned under the onslaught, its aging bones protesting. In the library, he found Amelia standing beneath the ceiling stain he'd noticed that morning. She held a basin, watching a steady drip of brown water collect in it. How bad? She asked without preamble. Bad enough. Dominic looked up at the spreading darkness on the plaster. The roof's been failing for years. I should have. He stopped himself. Should have. The refrain of his life. Can it be fixed? Eventually. Not today. She nodded, pragmatic. Then we work with what we have. Together, they moved furniture away from the worst leaks, rolled up rugs, positioned every container they could find. Thomas helped, his bandaged hand clutched to his chest, carrying smaller bowls with solemn concentration. The work was mindless but necessary, and Dominic found himself grateful for it. Action felt better than the alternative, sitting alone with his thoughts while the storm raged. By evening, the wind had reached a howl. One of the shutters on the second floor tore loose, banging against the stone wall with violent repetition. Dominic grabbed his coat. You can't go out in this, Amelia protested. It'll damage the window frame. Possibly break the glass. Then let it break. You'll be killed. He almost laughed. I've survived worse than weather. But when he opened the front door, the wind nearly ripped it from his hands. Rain lashed horizontally, icy and sharp. Dominic pushed forward, making his way along the side of the house. The shutter hung by a single hinge, slamming rhythmically. He reached for it, his fingers numb within seconds. The hinge snapped. The shutter swung outward, catching him across the shoulder and sending him stumbling. His bad leg buckled. He went down hard on the gravel, pain shooting through his knee. The shutter clattered away into the darkness. Then Amelia was there, somehow, her hand gripping his arm. Get up, she shouted over the storm. Move. He let her pull him to his feet, leaning more heavily than he wanted to admit. Together they staggered back to the door. Inside they collapsed against it, both soaked through, breathing hard. You're an idiot, Amelia gasped. So I've been told. Thomas appeared at the top of the stairs, eyes wide. Mama? We're fine, darling. She pushed wet hair out of her face, leaving a streak of mud across her cheek. Go back to the kitchen. Stay warm. He hesitated, then obeyed. Amelia turned to Dominic, assessing. Can you walk? Yes. Don't lie. I can walk. Just not elegantly. She made a sound that might have been exasperation or amusement. Come on. She led him to the kitchen, sat him down near the stove, and began building up the fire without asking permission. Dominic watched her move, noted the way she seemed to know where things were despite having been here only 2 days. She'd mapped the house, learned its rhythms. Survival instinct. Take off the coat, she ordered. And the shirt. That's hardly. You're shivering. Don't be precious about modesty. When he didn't immediately comply, she fixed him with a look that could have frozen the storm outside. I was married for 9 years, Your Grace. I've seen a man's chest before. Dominic stripped off the wet layers, his movements stiff. The scars were visible immediately, a patchwork of old wounds across his ribs and back. Amelia's expression didn't change. She handed him a blanket, then poured tea that had been steeping by the fire. Drink. He did. The warmth spread through him gradually, easing the violent shaking. Amelia disappeared and returned with dry clothes. His clothes taken from his room without permission. She set them beside him and turned her back, tending to her own wet garments. Why did you follow me out there? Dominic asked. Because you would have done something noble and stupid, and Thomas has seen enough people not come back. She wrung water from her hair. We've had our week reduced to however long this storm lasts. I won't have it shortened further by your martyrdom. It wasn't martyrdom. It was practicality. There's a difference? Despite everything, Dominic smiled. With you, I'm beginning to doubt it. She glanced at him, something flickering in her expression. Not quite warmth, but perhaps the acknowledgement that warmth might be possible. Outside, thunder cracked like artillery. Thomas called out, his voice thin with fear. Amelia went to him immediately, gathering him close. Dominic dressed quickly and followed. They ended up in the kitchen together as night fell completely, the storm raging around them. Thomas sat wrapped in blankets between his mother and Dominic, flinching at each thunderclap. Amelia told him stories, simple tales of brave children and kind animals, while Dominic kept the fire burning and listened despite himself. At some point, Thomas fell asleep against his mother's shoulder. She stroked his hair absently, her voice trailing off. Thank you, she said quietly, for not throwing us out today. The roads are impassable. You couldn't leave if you wanted to. Still, you could have made it worse. Dominic stared into the fire. I'm not a monster, Mrs. Crane. I never thought you were. She paused. Just someone who's forgotten he doesn't have to be alone. The words struck deeper than they should have. Dominic had no response. Around them, Greymont House creaked and settled, holding firm against the storm. For the first time in 6 years, the silence between its walls didn't feel like condemnation. It felt almost like possibility. The storm lasted 3 days. On the morning of the 4th day, Dominic woke to silence. Not the absence of sound, but the particular quality of quiet that followed violence. Exhausted, tentative, fragile. He rose and looked out the window. The grounds of Greymont were transformed. Branches littered the drive. The fountain had overflowed, creating a small lake. Part of the garden wall had collapsed. But the sky was clear. He dressed and went downstairs, expecting to find the house empty. Instead, he discovered Amelia in the entrance hall, staring at water damage that had spread across the floor during the night. A new leak, or perhaps an old one, finally surrendering. The parquet buckled in dark, swollen waves. It's worse than I thought, she said without turning. Most things are. She glanced at him then, and something in her expression had shifted. The sharp wariness had softened into something more complicated. Not trust exactly, but recognition. The roads will be clear by tomorrow, she said. Maybe the day after. Probably. We'll leave as soon as they are. She said it firmly, as if convincing herself. I'll find somewhere else. There are other villages, What if you stayed? The words surprised him as much as her. Amelia turned fully, studying his face for deception. You said a week. The week is over. I said the assessor would be here in a week. Dominic moved closer, his footsteps echoing on the damaged floor. I could delay him. Send word that the house needs repairs before evaluation. Why would you do that? He didn't have a simple answer. The storm had trapped them together, forced a proximity that should have been unbearable. Instead, he'd found himself grateful for voices in the house, for Thomas's questions and Amelia's directness. For the way she refused to treat him like either hero or ruin, seeing instead something in between. Because you need time, he said finally. And because this house has been empty long enough. Amelia's eyes narrowed. I can't pay more rent. What Pritchard stole was everything I had. I'm not asking for payment. Then what are you asking for? Dominic hesitated. What was he asking for? Permission to try again? A chance to prove the house could be more than a mausoleum? Or simply the selfish desire not to be alone with his ghosts? Help, he said. The house needs work. Repairs I can't afford to hire out. If you were willing to. He gestured at the damaged floor, the leaking ceiling above. It wouldn't be charity. It would be partnership. Partnership. She repeated the word slowly, tasting it. Between a duke and a penniless widow. Between two people trying not to drown. The silence stretched. Outside, a bird called, tentative and sweet. Thomas's footsteps sounded from upstairs, light and quick. I won't be owned, Amelia said quietly. Not by you, not by anyone. If I stay, it's on my terms. I leave when I choose. No obligations beyond the work. Agreed. And if your assessor comes, if you decide to sell anyway, I'll give you notice. Time to prepare. She searched his face for a long moment, then nodded once. All right, we'll stay. For now. Relief flooded through him, surprising in its intensity. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. You haven't seen me work. But there was something almost like amusement in her voice. Thomas appeared on the landing, clutching his wooden horse. Mama? Are we leaving? Amelia looked up at her son, and her expression softened completely. Not today, darling. The boy's face lit up. Can I explore the gardens? After breakfast. And carefully. He disappeared back toward the kitchen, already chattering to his toy. Amelia watched him go, then turned back to Dominic. He likes it here, she said. He hasn't felt safe enough to be curious in months. What about you? I don't have the luxury of liking places. I just survive them. She paused. But this one, it's quiet. And Gerald would never think to look in a duke's house. There was again Gerald. The shadow she was running from. Dominic filed the name away, along with the tension that appeared whenever she mentioned him. He won't find you here, Dominic said. I promise. Don't make promises about things you can't control. But she didn't sound angry. Just tired. Now, if we're doing this, we should start. That library ceiling won't repair itself. They worked through the morning, assessing damage and making lists. Thomas helped where he could, carrying tools and asking endless questions. Dominic found himself explaining the house's history, which wing was oldest, why certain rooms had higher ceilings, where his mother used to keep her garden. He hadn't spoken about his family in years. Hadn't let himself remember the good parts, only the guilt. But with Thomas listening, wide-eyed and fascinated, the memories felt less like accusations and more like stories. Things that had happened. Not punishments he deserved to carry forever. In the library, Amelia climbed a ladder to examine the ceiling leak more closely. The beam is rotted, she called down. It'll need replacing. Can you do that? My father was a carpenter. I learned. She descended, dusting her hands. But I'll need materials. And you'll need to help. It's not a one-person job. I'll help. She studied him, and for the first time she almost smiled. You might actually mean that. I do. Then we start tomorrow. She moved past him toward the door, then paused. Dominic. It was the first time she'd used his name. He turned. Thank you, she said simply. For the chance. Before he could respond, she was gone, following Thomas's voice deeper into the house. Dominic stood alone in the library, surrounded by books and damage and the ghost of his brother's laughter. Outside, the sun broke through the clouds. Greymont House stood battered but standing, and for the first time in 6 years Dominic Voss felt something he'd thought lost forever. Hope. The work began in earnest the next morning. Dominic woke before dawn, his body remembering the rhythm of military discipline even as his mind resisted. He found Amelia already in the kitchen, kneading dough with methodical precision. She tied her hair back with a strip of cloth, and flour dusted her forearms like snow. You're up early, he observed. Habits from the farm. She didn't look up from her work. My father believed idleness was a sin. I never quite shook the teaching. Your father was a carpenter, you said? And a farmer. And a dozen other things when money was short. She shaped the dough into loaves. He taught me that if something's broken, you fix it. You don't wait for someone else to care. Dominic poured himself tea, watching her work. There was something almost meditative about her movements, practiced, efficient, but not hurried. Is that why you agreed to stay? To fix things? I agreed to stay because my son needs stability and I need time. She finally met his eyes. But yes, I'd rather earn my place than accept charity. It's not charity. Then we understand each other. She covered the loaves with a cloth. The library first? The library first. They worked side by side through the morning, Dominic following Amelia's instructions as she assessed the damaged ceiling. She moved with confidence, pointing out rot and weakness with the kind of knowledge that came from experience rather than theory. Here, she said, tapping a beam. And here. These sections need to come down before we can rebuild. Won't that make it worse? Sometimes you have to break something further to fix it properly. She glanced at him. Leaving rot in place just spreads the damage. Dominic heard the metaphor clearly. He wondered if she meant it or if he was simply reading his own guilt into her words. Thomas sat in the corner, playing with wooden blocks Amelia had found in the nursery. His presence transformed the work, made it less about penance and more about building something new. The boy hummed tunelessly, lost in his own world, occasionally looking up to check that his mother was still there. He's always this quiet? Dominic asked. Not always. Before his father died, he was louder. Braver. Amelia's expression tightened. Gerald's household taught him to be small. To go unnoticed. What did Gerald do? She was silent for a long moment, her hands stilling on the beam she'd been examining. Nothing I could prove. Nothing violent. Just presence. Comments. The kind of attention that makes your skin crawl. You wanted me grateful. Dependent. Her voice went flat. When I refused, he made it clear Thomas and I weren't welcome to leave. But you left anyway. I would have walked through fire to get my son away from that house. She resumed working, her movements sharp now, angry. Gerald won't stop looking. Men like him don't accept rejection. They see it as temporary resistance. Dominic felt something cold settle in his chest. If he comes here. He won't. Why would he? A duke's estate is the last place he'd search for a runaway widow. She climbed down from the ladder, wiping her hands. As long as we stay invisible, we're safe. But Dominic heard the uncertainty beneath her confidence. She was hoping, not certain. And hope was a fragile defense. By afternoon, they'd removed the rotted sections of ceiling, exposing the damage fully. Dust covered everything and both of them were filthy. Thomas had fallen asleep on a cushion, exhausted by the excitement of destruction. Amelia stood in the center of the library, looking up at the wounded ceiling. It's worse than I thought. Can it still be fixed? Yes, but it'll take time. Weeks, not days. She turned to him. Are you sure about this? Once we start rebuilding, you can't easily undo it. If you sell, the buyer might not want. I'm sure. She studied him carefully. Why? Because you're right. Leaving rot in place just spreads the damage. A flicker of understanding passed between them. Amelia nodded slowly. Then we'll need supplies. Timber, nails, proper tools. The village. There's a merchant. Hollis. He might extend credit on the estate's name. Might. Dominic grimaced. My father left debts. Not everyone trusts the Voss name anymore. Then we'll convince him. Amelia's tone brooked no argument. Tomorrow. I'll go with you. You don't have to. You said partnership. That means I don't hide while you face things alone. She bent to gather Thomas into her arms. The boy stirred but didn't wake. Besides, a widow and a child make better optics than a reclusive duke. People pity mothers. They'll want to help. You'd use that. I'd use anything that works. She carried Thomas toward the door, then paused. Dominic? My father used to say that the measure of a man isn't in his mistakes. It's in what he builds after. She left before he could respond. That evening, Dominic found himself in William's room. The space where Thomas now slept, though the boy was downstairs with his mother. He stood at the window looking out at the darkening grounds. The room had been kept exactly as William left it. Dominic had ordered it preserved, then fled before he had to face it. Now, 6 years later, he saw it differently. Not a shrine, but a prison. He'd locked his brother in amber, refusing to let the memory grow or change or soften into something bearable. Amelia was right. Sometimes you had to break something to fix it. Slowly, Dominic began opening drawers. William's things, clothes, books, sketches. Evidence of a life interrupted but not erased. He sorted through them carefully, reverently. Some he would keep. Others he would pack away. The room needed to breathe again. Thomas needed space to be a child, not a ghost. When Amelia found him an hour later, he was sitting on the floor surrounded by William's possessions, holding a leather journal. His drawings, Dominic said quietly. I'd forgotten how good he was. Amelia sat beside him looking at the sketches. He saw beauty in ordinary things. Yes. That's a gift. Dominic closed the journal carefully. I'm going to clear this room. Make it proper for Thomas. Would that be all right? It's your house. But it's his room now. And William? His voice caught. William would want it used. He hated waste. Amelia's hand found his shoulder, brief and warm. Then we'll do it together. Tomorrow after the village. She stood and left him there, surrounded by memory and dust and the slow, painful work of letting go. Outside, the first stars appeared. The house settled around him and Dominic felt the weight shift, not gone but redistributed. Bearable. The village of Greymont sat 2 miles from the estate, a cluster of stone cottages and timber-frame shops huddled around a small square. Dominic hadn't been there in over 6 years, and as the cart rattled along the rutted road, he felt the weight of that absence like a physical thing. Amelia sat beside him, Thomas between them, the boy's excitement barely contained. She dressed carefully, her morning clothes clean and pressed, her hair pinned neatly. Armored, Dominic recognized. The widow presenting herself for judgment. Let me do the talking, she said quietly as they approached. At least at first. It's my estate. My debt. Exactly. Which means they already have opinions about you. She adjusted Thomas's collar. A woman asking for help to repair a home for her child? That's a different story. More sympathetic. Dominic wanted to argue but she was right. He'd abandoned Greymont, abandoned the people whose livelihoods depended on the estate. Whatever goodwill the Voss name once carried, he'd spent it long ago. They stopped in front of Hollis's timber yard. The merchant emerged, wiping his hands on his apron, a broad man in his 50s, weathered and shrewd. His eyes widened when he saw Dominic. Your Grace. The title came out stiff, uncertain. We'd heard you were back. Mr. Hollis. Dominic climbed down from the cart. I need supplies. Timber, nails? On credit, I assume? Hollis's tone wasn't quite hostile, but it wasn't warm either. Forgive my bluntness, but your father's accounts remain unsettled. I can't extend more debt to the estate. Amelia stepped forward. Mr. Hollis, my name is Amelia Crane. I'm residing at Greymont House with my son. We're undertaking repairs, essential repairs. The roof is failing and winter isn't far off. Hollis's expression softened slightly as he looked at Thomas. I'm sorry for your difficulties, ma'am, but business is business. I have my own family to consider. I understand completely. Amelia's voice remained steady, reasonable. Which is why I'm proposing a trade, not charity. I have skills, carpentry, mending, accounts. I could work off the debt. Or perhaps the estate has something of value that could serve as collateral. She glanced at Dominic and he understood. She was offering him a path that didn't rely on his tarnished name. The estate has furnishings, Dominic said. Paintings, silver, items my father collected. You could hold them against the debt. If we default, they're yours to sell. Hollis considered this, his merchant's mind calculating. I'd need to see them. Assess their worth. Tomorrow if you like. And the work? Who's doing it? I am, Amelia said firmly. With His Grace's assistance. I learned carpentry from my father. The work will be sound. Something shifted in Hollis's expression, respect perhaps for her directness. You know your way around timber? I do. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right. I'll extend credit for basic supplies. Modest amounts. But I'll hold items from the estate as guarantee, and I'll inspect the work as it progresses. Fair? More than fair, Amelia said. Thank you. As Hollis went to prepare their order, Thomas tugged at Dominic's sleeve. Are we really fixing the house? We really are. Will it be beautiful again? The question caught Dominic off guard. He'd been thinking in terms of function, stopping leaks, preventing further decay. But Thomas asked about beauty, about transformation, about making something worthy of love again. I hope so, Dominic said quietly. They were loading timber onto the cart when a woman approached, elderly, sharp-eyed, dressed in black. Mrs. Hadley, Dominic recognized. The village's unofficial chronicler and judge. Your Grace. She looked him up and down. So the prodigal returns. Mrs. Hadley. And who is this? Her gaze fixed on Amelia with predatory interest. Mrs. Amelia Crane, Amelia said before Dominic could answer. I'm renting rooms at Greymont House. Renting. Mrs. Hadley's tone suggested she found this dubious. How? Modern. And your husband? Dead. 8 months. Amelia's voice was flat, offering no opening for sympathy or further questions. I see. And you thought to take refuge with an unmarried duke. In his isolated estate. Without proper chaperonage. Mrs. Hadley's meaning was clear as glass. Dominic felt anger flash through him. Mrs. Crane is a tenant, nothing more. And my household arrangements are hardly. Your household arrangements affect this entire village, Your Grace. Mrs. Hadley drew herself up. Greymont Estate once employed half the families here. Then you left. Dismissed everyone. Let the land go fallow. Now you return with a strange woman and expect us to simply accept. I expect nothing, Dominic said coldly. Except basic civility. Civility must be earned. Amelia placed a hand on Dominic's arm, gentle but firm. A warning. She turned to Mrs. Hadley with perfect composure. You're right to be concerned, ma'am. A widow should be careful of appearances. But my son needed safety, and his grace offered shelter when I had nowhere else to turn. I'm working to earn my keep, honest labor, nothing scandalous. If that offends your sensibilities, I apologize. But I won't apologize for protecting my child. Mrs. Hadley's expression flickered, still disapproving but less certain. Thomas pressed against his mother's side, silent and wide-eyed. The village will be watching, Mrs. Hadley said finally. Mark my words. She swept away, leaving a wake of tension. Hollis emerged with nails and tools, pretending he hadn't heard the exchange. This should get you started. I'll bring the timber tomorrow. Thank you, Amelia said quietly. On the ride back, Thomas fell asleep against Dominic's side, exhausted by the morning's excitement. Amelia stared at the road ahead, her jaw tight. I'm sorry, Dominic said. For what she said. Don't be. She's right. People will talk. Amelia's hands tightened on the reins. They always do. A widow's reputation is fragile. And mine is already compromised by running. You did nothing wrong. That's never mattered. Not for women. She glanced at him. If this becomes a problem, if my presence damages what you're trying to rebuild, then let it. I don't care what they think. You should. You need this village if you're going to restore the estate. And you need safety. That matters more. She studied him, something unreadable in her expression. You keep surprising me. Is that good or bad? I'm not sure yet. They rode the rest of the way in silence, the timber rattling in the cart behind them, carrying the raw materials of repair. Above them clouds gathered. Not a storm. Not yet. But the threat of one always. The work consumed them. For 2 weeks, they labored from dawn until dusk, transforming the library from ruin into something resembling wholeness. Amelia worked with the focused intensity of someone who'd learned that survival meant never stopping, never questioning, simply doing. Dominic followed her lead, his hands remembering skills he'd thought belonged only to war. Precision, patience, the ability to hold steady when everything shook. Thomas became their assistant, fetching tools and singing off-key songs that echoed through the empty halls. The boy's presence changed the quality of the work. Made it less about penance and more about creation. Hand me the smaller hammer, Amelia called from the ladder, and Dominic passed it up. Their movements had developed a rhythm, a wordless communication born of proximity and shared purpose. She drove the nail with 3 clean strikes. My father used to say you could tell everything about a person by how they worked. Whether they cut corners. Whether they finished what they started. What do I tell you? Dominic asked. She glanced down at him. That you're trying to prove something. To yourself maybe. Or to ghosts. Is that so different from what you're doing? Probably not. She descended, wiping sweat from her forehead. We're both building toward something we're not sure we deserve. Before Dominic could respond, Thomas called out from the window. Mama. Someone's coming. They moved to look. A carriage was making its way up the drive, well-appointed, expensive. Dominic's chest tightened. He recognized the crest on the door. Who is it? Amelia asked. Lady Ashford. My father's sister. Dominic set down his tools. I haven't seen her since before the war. Should I make myself scarce? No. He said it more firmly than intended. No. You live here. You have every right to be present. But anxiety flickered across Amelia's face. She smoothed her work dress, stained with sawdust and sweat, and pulled Thomas close. Lady Catherine Ashford swept into Greymont House like a woman conducting an inspection. She was in her 60s, handsome rather than beautiful, with a kind of iron posture that suggested she'd never bent to anything in her life. Dominic. She kissed the air near his cheek. You look dreadful. Aunt Catherine. Always a pleasure. Her sharp eyes took in the scaffolding, the tools, the state of his clothes. Then they found Amelia, standing near the doorway with Thomas half hidden behind her skirts. "And who is this?" "Mrs. Amelia Crane," Dominic said. "She's residing here while undertaking repairs to the house." "Residing?" Catherine's tone could have cut glass. "How charitable of you." Amelia curtsied, her posture perfect despite her work clothes. "Lady Ashford." "Mrs. Crane." Catherine circled her slowly, assessing. "A widow, I presume, given the mourning dress?" "Yes, my lady." "And you're living here?" "Alone." "With my nephew." "I'm not alone. My son is with me." Catherine's gaze dropped to Thomas, who stared back with wide, uncertain eyes. "I see. And you're repairing the house yourself? How industrious." The condescension was precise, surgical. Amelia's jaw tightened, but her voice remained level. "His Grace was kind enough to offer shelter in exchange for work. It's been mutually beneficial." "I'm sure it has." Catherine turned to Dominic. "Might I speak with you privately?" It wasn't a request. In his father's study, Catherine wasted no time. "Have you lost your mind?" "I'm repairing the house." "Hardly insanity. You're housing an unmarried woman of unclear background under your roof, without chaperonage, while the entire village watches." Catherine's voice was ice. "Do you have any idea what people are saying?" "I don't particularly care." "Then you're a fool." She moved to the window, looking out at the damaged grounds. "You disappeared for 6 years, Dominic. 6 years of silence while the estate collapsed and the family name became synonymous with abandonment. Now you return with a mysterious widow and expect society to simply accept." "I expect nothing from society. I never have." "Then think of her." Catherine spun to face him. "Mrs. Crane. Whatever her circumstances, she's a woman alone. Her reputation is all she has. By keeping her here, unchaperoned, you're destroying it. No respectable household will employ her. No decent man will court her. You're ruining her out of, what? Guilt? Loneliness." The accusation struck home because it was partially true. Dominic had asked Amelia to stay for selfish reasons as much as practical ones. Because the house felt less haunted with her in it. Because Thomas's laughter made the silence bearable. "She needed safety," he said quietly. "I offered it. And what happens when you tire of this project? When the house is sold and she's cast out with a reputation in tatters?" Catherine's expression softened slightly. "I know you mean well, Dominic. But good intentions don't protect women in her position. Only marriage or proper distance does." "Are you suggesting I marry her?" "I'm suggesting you think beyond yourself for once." Catherine gathered her gloves. "If you truly want to help Mrs. Crane, find her respectable employment elsewhere. Give her references. But don't keep her here like some experiment in redemption." She left in a rustle of silk, the carriage departing as swiftly as it had arrived. Dominic found Amelia in the library working alone. Thomas was napping upstairs. "What did she say?" Amelia asked without looking up. "That I'm damaging your reputation. That people are talking." "They are." She set down her hammer. "Mrs. Hadley made sure of that. I could find you other employment. Write references. My aunt suggested." "I heard what your aunt suggested." Amelia finally met his eyes. The walls are thin and she wasn't exactly quiet. Silence stretched between them. Outside, wind rattled the windows. "Is she right?" Amelia asked quietly. "Am I an experiment? A way for you to feel less guilty about the choices you've made?" "No." Dominic moved closer. "You're," he stopped, uncertain how to finish. "What was she?" "A tenant. A partner. Something more complicated than either. You're someone trying to survive. Same as me. And yes, maybe I need that. Maybe I need to see that survival is possible. But that doesn't make it exploitation. Doesn't it?" Amelia's voice was soft but sharp. "You have a title, land, options. I have nothing but what you allow me. That's not partnership. That's dependence dressed up in prettier words. Then what do you want?" She looked away. "I want to stay. I want Thomas to feel safe. But I also want," she pressed her lips together, "I want to matter. Not as a project or a charity case, but as someone with value beyond what I fix or clean or build. You do matter. Do I? Or am I just convenient? A way to fill the silence." Dominic had no answer that wouldn't sound hollow. Because she was right. He'd asked her to stay for complicated reasons and not all of them were noble. "I don't know," he admitted finally. "I don't know what this is. But I know I don't want you to leave." Amelia studied him for a long moment, something vulnerable flickering in her expression before she shuttered it. "Then we keep working," she said. "But understand this, Dominic, I won't be kept. Not by you, not by anyone. The moment this becomes a cage, I'm gone." "I understand." She picked up her hammer and returned to the beam, her movements deliberate, controlled. Outside, the first drops of rain began to fall. The letter arrived on a gray morning, 3 weeks after Lady Ashford's visit. Dominic found it on the hall table, addressed in an unfamiliar hand. No crest, no return address. He opened it standing there, still in his work clothes from the morning's repairs. "Your Grace, I am writing to inquire about a Mrs. Amelia Crane, whom I have reason to believe may be residing at your estate. Mrs. Crane departed her late husband's family home without permission, taking with her my nephew, Thomas Crane, who is under my legal guardianship as the boy's closest male relative. I understand you may have been deceived by her circumstances. Mrs. Crane has a history of instability and poor judgment. For the child's welfare, I must insist on her immediate return, or I shall be forced to pursue legal remedies. I trust you will do the honorable thing. Respectfully, Gerald Crane." Dominic read it twice, his hands tightening on the paper until it crumpled. So, the shadow Amelia had been running from had finally found her. He found her in William's room, now properly Thomas's room, mending a tear in the curtains. She looked up when he entered, and her expression changed immediately. "What's happened?" He handed her the letter without speaking. The color drained from her face as she read. Her hands began to shake. No, he can't. He's claiming guardianship. He has no right." Her voice rose, sharp with panic. "I'm Thomas's mother. Gerald is nothing. Just his uncle by marriage and a distant one at that. Legally he may have a claim. If your husband's will specified." There was no will. Amelia stood abruptly, pacing. "Robert died suddenly. We talked about arrangements, but we never—" She pressed her hands to her face. "Oh God. He's going to take him. Gerald is going to take my son." "No, he won't. You can't promise that. You don't know him. He's patient. Methodical. He'll use the law, use my reputation, use anything he can to—" Her breath came in short gasps. "He said I was unstable. Did you see that? He'll claim I'm an unfit mother. That I fled with Thomas out of madness or desperation. That I'm living in sin with a duke, corrupting my child." "Amelia." Dominic caught her shoulders, forcing her to look at him. "Listen to me. He's not taking Thomas. I won't allow it." "How? How will you stop him? You can't fight the law. And if it goes to court, I have nothing. No money for solicitors, no respectable references. You have me." She stared at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "That's not enough. Don't you understand? Your word, your title, it means something but not enough to override a blood relative's claim. Not when I'm—" She gestured at herself, at the room, at the impossible situation. "Not when I'm this." Dominic's mind raced, sorting through options. Gerald's letter was calculated, polite enough to seem reasonable, threatening enough to frighten. He was testing the waters, seeing if Dominic would simply hand Amelia over to avoid scandal. "We could challenge his claim," Dominic said. "Argue that you're the natural guardian. That there's no evidence of instability. Except that I fled in the night, took Thomas without telling anyone, and am now living unchaperoned with a man I barely know." Amelia's laugh was bitter. "Gerald doesn't need evidence. He just needs doubt. And I've given him plenty. Then we remove the doubt." "How?" The answer came to him clearly, inevitably. The same solution his aunt had hinted at, though for different reasons. "Marry me." Amelia went very still. "What?" "Marry me," Dominic repeated. "If you're my wife, Gerald has no claim. Thomas becomes part of my household, under my protection. Legally, socially, it ends his leverage completely." "That's insane." "It's practical. She turned away, gripping the back of a chair. "You don't want to marry me. You're offering out of obligation. I'm offering because it solves the problem. Marriage isn't a solution, Dominic. It's a life sentence." Her voice cracked. "And I won't trap you into something permanent just to save myself. You're not trapping me. I'm choosing this." "Why?" She spun to face him. "Why would you choose this? You barely know me. We've worked together for a few weeks, but that doesn't mean—" She stopped, searching his face. "What do you think this is? What do you think we are?" Dominic didn't have a simple answer. What were they? Two people thrown together by circumstance, building something fragile in the ruins of their separate griefs. He didn't love her, not yet, maybe not ever. But he respected her. needed her presence in ways he couldn't fully articulate. And the thought of Gerald taking Thomas, of Amelia disappearing back into whatever nightmare she'd escaped, was intolerable. "I think we're two people trying to survive," he said finally. "And I think we have a better chance together than apart. That's not love. No. But it's honest." He moved closer. "I'm not offering you romance, Amelia. I'm offering partnership. Protection. A legal tie that gives you safety and gives Thomas a future. If that's not enough." "It's not about enough." Her voice was barely a whisper. "It's about what happens when you wake up one day and realize you're chained to someone you didn't choose. When the gratitude fades and all that's left is resentment. Then we build something better than resentment." She closed her eyes. "You make it sound simple." "It's not. But the alternative is worse." A long silence. Outside, a crow called, harsh and lonely. Thomas's footsteps sounded on the stairs. He'd been playing in the attic. "If I say yes," Amelia said slowly, "it's on terms. Real terms, not just pretty words. Name them. Equal partnership. My voice matters in decisions about this house, about Thomas, about our lives." "Agreed. No pretense of love. We're honest about what this is, a practical arrangement." "Agreed. And if it becomes unbearable, if either of us can't sustain it, we find a way out. Separation, annulment, whatever's necessary. I won't be imprisoned by vows." That one hurt more than Dominic expected. The idea that she was already planning their ending before they'd begun. But he understood it. She'd been trapped before. She wouldn't risk it again. "Agreed," he said. Amelia opened her eyes, and they were full of a grief he couldn't name. "Then yes, I'll marry you." Thomas burst into the room, clutching a wooden soldier. "Mama, look what I found." Amelia swept him up, holding him close. Over the boy's head, her eyes met Dominic's. They'd made their choice. Now they would live with it. They married 3 days later in the village church, with only the vicar and Hollis as witnesses. Amelia wore her mourning dress, the only decent thing she owned. Dominic had offered to buy her something new, but she'd refused. "Let them see exactly what this is," she'd said. "A practical arrangement. Not a romance." The ceremony was brief, mechanical. The vicar stumbled over the words, clearly uncomfortable with the haste and circumstances. When Dominic slipped the ring onto Amelia's finger, his mother's ring retrieved from the house's safe, her hand was cold and steady. She didn't look at him during the vows. Only at Thomas, who sat in the front pew swinging his legs, oblivious to the gravity of what was happening. "I now pronounce you man and wife." No kiss. They'd agreed on that beforehand. Just a formal nod between them, acknowledging the contract made. Outside the church, Mrs. Hadley stood with a cluster of village women, their expressions ranging from shock to scandalized delight. News would spread like fire. The Duke married the mysterious widow. Unseemly haste. Obvious reasons. Let them talk. Dominic helped Amelia into the cart, then lifted Thomas up. The boy chattered about the stained glass windows, about whether being a duchess meant his mother was now royalty. Amelia answered patiently, her voice carefully neutral. On the ride back to Greymont, she finally spoke to Dominic. "I need to write to Gerald. Tell him before he hears through gossip. We'll write together. Make it clear that Thomas is legally mine now. That any challenge will fail. He won't accept it quietly. I'm counting on that." Dominic's voice was harder than he intended. "Let him come. I'd like very much to meet him." Amelia glanced at him, something flickering in her expression. Not quite gratitude. More like recognition of shared anger. The letter they composed that evening was coldly formal. "Mr. Crane, I write to inform you that as of this date, Mrs. Amelia Crane has become my wife, the Duchess of Greymont. Her son, Thomas, is now under my legal protection and guardianship as my stepson. Any claims you believed you held are void. Any attempt to pursue them will be met with the full force of law and resources available to this estate. Consider this matter closed. Dominic Voss, Duke of Greymont." They sealed it together, Amelia's hand covering Dominic's on the wax. A united front, at least on paper. "He'll be furious," she said quietly. "Good." That night, they faced the question they'd avoided: sleeping arrangements. The house had dozens of rooms, but tradition expected them to share the master suite. Appearances mattered, especially now. "I'll take the dressing room," Dominic offered. "There's a sofa. It's comfortable enough." Amelia stood in the doorway of their bedroom looking lost. "This isn't what I imagined." "What did you imagine?" "Nothing anymore. I stopped letting myself imagine things after Robert died. She touched the doorframe. But if I had, it wouldn't have been this. A marriage of convenience to a stranger. The title I never wanted. Sleeping in separate rooms while pretending. We're not pretending. We're surviving. Is there a difference? Before he could answer, Thomas appeared, dragging his blanket. I can't sleep. The house is too big. Amelia bent to him immediately. Come here, darling. They ended up in a strange tableau. Amelia and Thomas in the large bed, Dominic on the sofa in the dressing room with the door ajar. Not a family. Not yet. But not quite strangers anymore either. The consequences arrived faster than expected. 2 days after the wedding, a carriage pulled up, not Gerald's but Lady Ashford's. She swept in without invitation, her face a mask of controlled fury. A wedding, she said without preamble. You married her without telling anyone. Without family present. Without even the decency of proper engagement. It was necessary, Dominic said. Necessary. Catherine turned to Amelia, who stood near the stairs with Thomas half hidden behind her. You've done well for yourself, haven't you, Mrs.? Excuse me, Your Grace? From penniless widow to duchess in a matter of weeks. Quite the accomplishment. I didn't ask for the title, Amelia said quietly. But you accepted it readily enough. Catherine's voice was cutting. Tell me, did you know what you were doing when you moved into this house? Did you plan this from the beginning? Aunt Catherine, Dominic started, but Amelia raised a hand. Yes, she said clearly. I planned to keep my son safe from a man who looked at him in ways that made my skin crawl. I planned to work hard enough that I'd deserve shelter. And when your nephew offered marriage to protect us legally, I planned to accept, because I'd be a fool to refuse the only real security I've been offered in 8 months. She stepped forward, her chin up. If that makes me mercenary in your eyes, so be it. I won't apologize for choosing survival. Catherine stared at her for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, her expression softened a fraction. At least you're honest about it. I have no reason to be otherwise. No, I suppose you don't. Catherine turned to Dominic. You've made your choice. I hope you understand what it means. Society will not be kind. The family name, such as it is, will be further damaged. And when this arrangement becomes unbearable, as these things inevitably do, you'll have no easy escape. I know. Do you? She gathered her things. You've spent 6 years running from responsibility, Dominic. Now you've bound yourself to it in the most permanent way possible. I wonder if you truly understand what you've done. She left with that, the carriage rolling away into the gray afternoon. Amelia stood very still, her hands clenched. She's right. About what? All of it. This will be unbearable eventually. You'll resent me, Thomas. The choice you made. Maybe. Dominic moved closer. Or maybe we'll find a way to make it work. Build something real out of necessity. You actually believe that? He wanted to say yes. Wanted to offer certainty and hope. But he'd learned that lies, even kind ones, only delayed pain. I believe it's possible, he said instead. That's enough for now. Amelia nodded slowly. Thomas emerged from behind her, looking worried. Are we in trouble? No, darling. She knelt to his level. We're safe. That's what matters. The boy hugged her, and over his head, Amelia's eyes met Dominic's. In them he saw fear and determination in equal measure. The look of someone who'd wagered everything on a desperate gamble and was still waiting to see if it would pay. Outside, clouds gathered. Rain was coming again. But for now they stood together in the entrance hall of Greymont House. A duke, a duchess, and a child, bound by law and necessity and the fragile hope that sometimes survival was enough. Being a duchess, Amelia discovered, was mostly paperwork. Estate accounts that hadn't been properly maintained in years. Correspondence from distant relatives and solicitors. Invitations to events in London that she had no intention of attending. The title came with expectations she'd never anticipated. Social obligations, charitable responsibilities, the complex choreography of aristocratic life. She tackled it the way she tackled everything. Methodically, without complaint, treating it like any other job that needed doing. Dominic found her in the study one afternoon, surrounded by ledgers. She tied her hair back with a ribbon, ink staining her fingers. You don't have to do this, he said. We could hire a steward. With what money? She didn't look up from the columns of numbers. The estate is hemorrhaging funds, Dominic. Your father's debts, the neglected repairs, the unpaid staff wages, it's worse than I thought. I know. Do you? Now she looked at him and her expression was serious. We're months away from insolvency. Maybe less. If we can't find income, if the harvest fails, if anything goes wrong, we'll manage. How? By selling off furniture? That buys us weeks, not years. She set down her pen. We need a real plan. The tenant farms need investment to produce properly. The village needs the estate to employ people again. And we need— She stopped, seeming to reconsider her words. What? We need to stop hiding, she said finally. You've been invisible for 6 years. The tenants don't trust you because they don't know you. If we're going to rebuild this estate, you need to be visible again. Present. The Duke of Greymont, not just a ghost haunting these halls. Dominic felt the old resistance rise. I can't. You can. You just don't want to. Her voice wasn't cruel, just factual. But you married me to protect Thomas. That means you committed to staying, to building something lasting. You can't do that from the shadows. She was right and he hated it. Visibility meant facing the questions he'd spent years avoiding. Meant explaining the unexplainable. Why he'd survived when William hadn't, why he'd abandoned everything, why he was worthy of the title he'd never wanted. What do you suggest? He asked. Start small. Visit the tenant farms. Meet with the village council. Show them you're invested in more than just your own guilt. She stood, moving around the desk. And we should host something. A dinner. Nothing elaborate, just the local families. Let them see us as a couple, see Thomas settled. Make this marriage real in their eyes. A dinner. The thought made his chest tight. I haven't hosted anything since. Since before you left. I know. Amelia's expression softened slightly. But we're the Duke and Duchess of Greymont now. Like it or not, that comes with responsibilities. And if we're going to survive, if this estate is going to survive, we need the community's support. The dinner was planned for 2 weeks hence. Modest by aristocratic standards, just 8 guests, local gentry and prominent merchants. But to Dominic it felt monumental. Amelia threw herself into preparations with the same focused intensity she brought to everything. She cleaned the formal dining room herself, polished silver that hadn't been used in a decade, planned a menu that was impressive but not ostentatious. Thomas helped, delighted by the activity, treating it like an elaborate game. Dominic watched them work and felt something shift in his chest. They'd been married 3 weeks and already the house felt different. Not happy exactly, but occupied. Purposeful. The silence had texture now, the sound of Amelia's footsteps, Thomas's questions, the daily rhythm of people actually living rather than merely existing. Stop brooding and help, Amelia called from across the room. These curtains need to be hung. He obeyed, climbing the ladder while she directed from below. Their movements had developed an ease, a familiarity born of constant proximity. He knew now that she bit her lip when concentrating, that she sang quietly to herself when she thought no one was listening, that she checked on Thomas exactly 3 times each night to ensure he was breathing. Small intimacies of daily life. Not love, but something. Higher on the left, she instructed. There. Perfect. From his vantage point on the ladder, Dominic could see the whole room, the progress they'd made, the beauty slowly emerging from neglect. And he could see Amelia below, her face tilted up, a rare smile softening her features. She caught him looking. What? Nothing. Just, thank you. For this. The smile faded into something more complicated. Don't thank me. I'm as trapped as you are. I'm just making the cage more comfortable. Is that what this feels like? A cage. She was quiet for a moment. Sometimes. But sometimes it feels like. She trailed off, shaking her head. Never mind. The curtains are done. We should check on the silver. She left before he could press. But her unfinished sentence hung in the air, and Dominic found himself wondering what she'd been about to say. The night before the dinner, Gerald's response arrived. Not a letter this time. A person. Dominic answered the door himself. They still had no butler, and found a man in his 40s standing on the steps. Well-dressed, handsome in a cold way, with eyes that assessed and calculated. Your Grace, the man said smoothly. I'm Gerald Crane. I believe you've been expecting me. Every instinct Dominic had honed in war screamed danger. This was a predator, dressed in gentleman's clothing. Polite. Patient. Absolutely ruthless. Mr. Crane. Dominic didn't move from the doorway. You've had my letter. There's nothing further to discuss. On the contrary, I think there's a great deal to discuss. Gerald's smile didn't reach his eyes. My nephew's welfare, for instance. The suddenness of your marriage to my sister-in-law. The question of whether all this was truly in Thomas's best interest, or merely convenient for 2 desperate people. Thomas is safe, happy, and legally my responsibility. That's all that matters. Is it? Gerald tilted his head. I wonder what a magistrate would think. A widow fleeing in the night with a child, taking refuge with an unmarried duke, then suddenly married with suspicious haste. It suggests instability, Your Grace. Poor judgment. Possibly even coercion. Dominic's hands clenched. If you're threatening. I'm simply observing. Though I confess I'm curious to meet the new Duchess. To see for myself how she's adapted to her circumstances. Before Dominic could respond, Amelia's voice came from behind him. Then your curiosity is satisfied, Mr. Crane? I'm here. And I have nothing to say to you. She stood in the hallway, Thomas's hand gripped tightly in hers. The boy had gone pale, pressing against his mother's side. Gerald's expression changed, something hungry flickering in his eyes as he looked at them. Amelia, you're looking well. And Thomas, how you've grown. Thomas said nothing, his face buried against Amelia's skirt. My son doesn't wish to speak with you, Amelia said, her voice steady despite the tension radiating from her. Neither do I. You've had your answer. Now leave. Such hostility. And after I came all this way to ensure Thomas's welfare. Gerald's tone was wounded, performative. I simply want what's best for the boy. Surely you can understand that. What's best for Thomas is that you leave us alone. Is it? Or is it best for you? Gerald took a step forward, and Dominic immediately blocked his path. The two men faced each other, the threat implicit. You're not welcome here, Dominic said quietly. If you attempt contact again, with Amelia, with Thomas, with anyone on this estate, I will pursue harassment charges. Am I clear? Gerald studied him for a long moment, then smiled. Perfectly. Though I wonder, Your Grace, if you truly understand what you've taken on. Amelia has a gift for creating chaos. For manipulating circumstances to her advantage. I do hope you won't regret your charitable impulses. He tipped his hat and walked to his waiting carriage, his movements unhurried, confident. As the carriage pulled away, Thomas burst into tears. Amelia sank to the floor, holding him, whispering reassurances. Dominic closed the door and locked it, his heart pounding with an anger he hadn't felt since the war. This wasn't over. Gerald Crane had retreated but not surrendered. And now they would have to live with that shadow, waiting for him to strike again. The dinner that night was a disaster barely averted. Amelia moved through the evening in a daze, her smile fixed, her responses automatic. Gerald's visit had shaken something loose in her, a carefully maintained composure that now threatened to crumble. Dominic watched her across the table, saw the tremor in her hands as she poured wine, the way her eyes kept drifting to Thomas upstairs. Their guests noticed nothing. Or pretended not to. Mr. Hollis and his wife, the vicar and his sister, two tenant farmers and their spouses. They ate and drank and made polite conversation about the weather, the harvest, the state of the roads. Safe topics. Nothing that mattered. When the last guest finally departed, Amelia disappeared upstairs without a word. Dominic found her in Thomas's room, sitting beside the sleeping boy's bed, her hand on his chest as if checking his heartbeat. He's safe, Dominic said quietly from the doorway. For now. Her voice was hollow. But Gerald won't stop. You saw him. He doesn't accept defeat. Then we'll be ready when he comes back. How? What can we possibly do against someone like him? She looked up and her eyes were red-rimmed. He has resources, connections, patience. And he's right about one thing, our marriage looks suspicious. Too fast, too convenient. If he challenges it in court, if he argues I'm unstable or that you coerced me, we'll fight it. With what? Empty coffers and a tarnished reputation. Amelia stood abruptly, moving to the window. I've trapped you in this. You see that, don't you? You thought you were helping, being noble, but all you've done is tie yourself to someone who brings nothing but problems. That's not true. Isn't it? She turned, and there was something wild in her expression. Look at this house. Still falling apart despite all our work. Look at the estate, bankrupt, failing. Look at me, a woman with no connections, no dowry, nothing to offer except labor and a child another man wants to claim. What exactly have you gained from this arrangement? Dominic moved into the room, keeping his voice low so as not to wake Thomas. I've gained someone who sees me as more than my failures. Who doesn't treat me like a ghost or a disappointment. Who works beside me instead of pitying me. That's not enough. It is for me. Well, it shouldn't be. The words burst out sharper than intended. Amelia pressed her hand to her mouth, then continued more quietly. You deserve more than this. More than a marriage of convenience with a desperate widow. More than spending your resources protecting people you barely know from threats you didn't create. What I deserve isn't relevant. What I choose is. And what happens when you regret that choice? When Gerald succeeds in taking Thomas, or the estate fails anyway, or you wake up one day and realize you've wasted your life on someone else's problems. Her voice cracked. I can't be the reason you destroy yourself, Dominic. I've already lost too much. I can't carry your regret too. He understood then. This wasn't really about Gerald or the estate or their marriage. This was about loss. About her belief that everyone she touched eventually suffered for it. You think you're poison, he said softly. That caring about you is dangerous. She didn't deny it. Amelia, look at me. He waited until she did. Gerald appearing tonight doesn't change anything. We knew he'd come eventually. We prepared for it. We're married, Thomas is legally protected, and we have resources Gerald doesn't expect. This estate, my title, my connections, however tarnished. We're not helpless. We're not strong either. Then we become stronger. Together. He moved closer. You asked me once what I thought we were. I didn't have an answer then. But I do now. We're two people who refuse to surrender. Who keep building even when everything collapses. That's worth more than love or romance or any of the things traditional marriages offer. Is it enough though? Long term? I don't know. But I'd rather find out with you than alone. Amelia's shoulders sagged. She looked exhausted, worn thin by fear and responsibility. I'm so tired, Dominic. Tired of running, tired of fighting, tired of being afraid every time someone knocks on the door. I know. I want Thomas to have a real childhood. Safety. Stability. Not this constant uncertainty. He will. We'll make sure of it. She studied his face for a long moment, searching for something. Then slowly she nodded. All right. We keep fighting. But you have to promise me something. What? If it becomes too much, if protecting us threatens to destroy you, you'll tell me. You'll let me go rather than sacrifice yourself. Her eyes were fierce. I won't be the reason another person I care about is ruined. The admission hung in the air between them. Another person I care about. Not love. But not indifference either. I promise, Dominic said. If you promise the same. No more talk of being poison or bringing nothing. We're partners. That means equal weight, equal value. Even when I'm terrified and irrational? Especially then. A ghost of a smile crossed her face. You might regret that promise. Probably. But I'm making it anyway. They stood there in the quiet of Thomas's room, the boy sleeping peacefully between them, unaware of the currents swirling around him. Outside an owl called. The house settled and creaked, its familiar sounds now almost comforting. The dinner went well, Amelia said after a moment. Despite everything. You were perfect. I was numb. There's a difference. They couldn't tell. She laughed softly, bitterly. I've gotten good at pretending. Years of practice. You won't have to pretend forever. Won't I? She looked at him. Isn't that what being a duchess is? Performing a role convincingly enough that no one sees the truth underneath? Maybe. Or maybe it's choosing which truth to show. Amelia considered this. Then she moved toward the door, pausing beside him. Thank you. For tonight. For not letting me spiral completely. That's what partners do. She reached out, hesitated, then briefly touched his hand. The contact was fleeting, uncertain, but deliberate. Good night, Dominic. Good night. He listened to her footsteps fade down the hall to their bedroom. After a moment, he followed, finding her already in bed, facing the wall. He took his usual place on the dressing room sofa, leaving the door ajar as always. In the darkness, he heard her voice, barely a whisper. Dominic? Yes. I'm glad you're here. Even if this is complicated and messy and probably doomed. I'm glad I'm not facing it alone. His chest tightened. So am I. Silence settled. But it felt different now, not empty but full of unspoken understanding. They were bound together by more than law or convenience. By choice and determination and the fragile hope that sometimes, broken people could build something whole. Outside, storm clouds gathered on the horizon. But inside Greymont House, two people slept a little easier, knowing they wouldn't face the coming tempest alone. The magistrate's summons arrived 2 weeks later. Gerald had filed a petition questioning the legitimacy of the marriage and demanding an inquiry into Thomas's welfare. The hearing was scheduled for a month hence in London. Mandatory attendance required. Dominic read the document twice, his jaw tight. He's forcing us into public scrutiny. Amelia sat across from him, unnaturally still. It's what he does. Creates official channels, uses the law as a weapon. He knows we don't have the resources for a prolonged legal battle. Then we'll find them. How? The estate accounts are. I'll sell land if necessary. Borrow against the title. Whatever it takes. Dominic set the summons down. But we need more than money. We need credibility. Character witnesses who can testify to your fitness as a mother, to the validity of our marriage. Who would do that? We barely know anyone. Your aunt despises me, the village tolerates us at best. Then we change that. An idea was forming, risky but necessary. We go to London. Not to hide and wait for the hearing but early. We present ourselves socially, make connections, show society that we're a legitimate couple with a stable household. Amelia stared at him. You want to enter society? After 6 years of hiding? I don't want to. But you were right before. I can't rebuild from the shadows. He leaned forward. Gerald is counting on us being isolated, vulnerable. We need to prove him wrong. London will eat us alive. The gossip, the scrutiny. Let them scrutinize. Let them see a duke and duchess devoted to their son, working to restore an estate, building something real. Dominic's voice was firm. We show them the truth, Amelia. Not a scandal but a family. She looked away, her hands knotted in her lap. I don't know how to be what they expect. I'm a carpenter's daughter, a farmer's widow. I don't know their rules there. Neither do I anymore. We'll learn together. And Thomas? We expose him to all that judgment. We show them a happy, healthy child. The best evidence we have. Amelia was silent for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was small. I'm scared. It was the first time she'd admitted it so plainly. Dominic moved around the desk, crouching beside her chair. So am I. But we're not the same people who ran and hid. We're stronger now. Are we? Or are we just better at pretending? Does it matter? If we pretend well enough, it becomes real. She looked at him, and something shifted in her expression. When did you become the optimistic one? When you gave me something worth fighting for. The words hung between them, more intimate than intended. Amelia's breath caught, and for a moment the space between them felt charged with possibility. Then Thomas's voice called from the hallway, breaking the spell. Mama, come see what I built. Amelia stood quickly, composing herself. We'll need proper clothes for London. Tutoring for Thomas. A plan. We'll manage. She paused at the door. Dominic? If we do this, if we really commit to fighting Gerald publicly, there's no going back. Our lives will be examined, judged, dissected. Every choice, every moment, every imperfection exposed. I know. And you're willing to face that? He thought of the 6 years he'd spent hiding, the weight of guilt and shame that had nearly crushed him. Then he thought of the past 2 months, the work, the progress, the feeling of purpose returning. And he thought of Amelia and Thomas, the family he'd accidentally built from desperation and necessity. Yes, he said. I'm willing. They left for London 3 weeks later. The journey took 2 days, Thomas delighted by the adventure, Amelia silent and tense. Dominic had written ahead, securing a townhouse, modest by ducal standards but respectable. He'd also contacted the few family connections he hadn't completely alienated, requesting introductions, support, guidance. Most ignored him. But a few responded. Distant cousins, his father's old business associates, people who remembered the Voss name before its decline. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Their first social appearance was a garden party hosted by Lady Pemberton, a distant relation with more curiosity than judgment. Amelia dressed in a new gown, simple, elegant, paid for by selling one of the estate's lesser paintings. She looked beautiful and terrified. Remember, Dominic murmured as their carriage approached. We're not here to convince them we're perfect. Just real. What if real isn't enough? Then they weren't worth convincing. The party was exactly as awful as expected. Whispers followed them, conversations stopped when they approached, eyes assessed and judged. But Dominic stayed close to Amelia, his presence a constant anchor. And slowly, carefully they began to engage. Lady Pemberton proved unexpectedly kind, introducing them to others with genuine warmth. A few people remembered Dominic from before the war, expressed tentative welcome. And when Thomas appeared, well-behaved, articulate, clearly adored by his mother, the atmosphere shifted slightly. Children, Dominic realized, were powerful social currency. A happy child suggested stable parents, proper values, respectability. They survived the party. Then another. And another. Each appearance was exhausting, a performance that left them both drained. But gradually they built a fragile network. Not friends exactly but allies. People willing to testify if needed, that the Duke and Duchess of Greymont appeared devoted, appropriate, legitimate. One evening, 3 weeks into their London campaign, Amelia found Dominic on the townhouse balcony, staring at the city lights. "Can't sleep?" she asked. "Too much thinking." She joined him at the railing. "About the hearing?" "About everything. Whether this is working, whether we're strong enough, whether—" He stopped. "Whether I'm doing right by you and Thomas." "You are." She said it with quiet certainty. "I know this is hard. I know you hate every minute of these social performances. But you're here fighting when you could have just let Gerald take us." "I would never." "I know. That's my point." She turned to face him. "You're not the man who ran 6 years ago. That person was drowning. You're different now. Because you pulled me out. We pulled each other out." She smiled slightly. "Strange how that works." They stood in comfortable silence, the city humming below them. Then Amelia spoke again, her voice hesitant. "Dominic? After the hearing, after all this is resolved, whatever the outcome, what happens to us?" "What do you mean?" "This marriage. It was tactical, protective. But if we win, if Gerald is defeated and Thomas is safe, do we continue pretending? Or do we—" She paused. "I don't know what I'm asking." "You're asking if this becomes real." "Yes." Dominic considered carefully. Over the past months, Amelia had become essential to him, not just as a partner in survival, but as a person he genuinely valued, respected, cared for in ways that had nothing to do with obligation. Was that love? He still wasn't sure. But it was something. "I think," he said slowly, "we decide that when we get there. No pressure, no expectations. Just openness to possibility." "That's very diplomatic." "I'm learning from you." She laughed softly. "Heaven help us both." But she didn't move away. And when their hands found each other on the railing, neither pulled back. Below them, London slept and stirred. Above them, stars appeared between the clouds. And between them, something fragile and uncertain began to grow. Not quite love, not yet, but the foundation on which love might eventually be built. If they survived what was coming. The courtroom was smaller than Dominic expected, paneled in dark wood that absorbed light and sound. Gerald sat with his solicitor, impeccably dressed, his expression one of concerned civility. The magistrate, Lord Ashworth, elderly and severe, reviewed documents with methodical precision. Amelia sat beside Dominic, her spine rigid, her hands folded so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Thomas waited outside with Lady Pemberton, who'd agreed to supervise him during the proceedings. "All rise for the Honorable Lord Ashworth." The formalities began. Gerald's solicitor spoke first, painting a picture of a desperate widow who'd fled with a child, seduced a vulnerable duke, and engineered a hasty marriage to avoid legitimate guardianship claims. The words were careful, legally precise, devastating in their implications. "Mrs. Crane, pardon the Duchess, has shown a pattern of instability and poor judgment. She abandoned her late husband's family without notice, taking the child in the dead of night. She imposed herself upon His Grace at his most vulnerable, living unchaperoned for weeks before a suspiciously hasty marriage. We must ask, was this truly in the child's best interest, or merely the desperate act of a woman securing her own position?" Dominic felt Amelia flinch beside him. He reached for her hand under the table, holding it firmly. When it was their turn, their solicitor, Mr. Bellamy, recommended by Lady Pemberton, presented a different narrative. A widow seeking safety from an uncomfortable situation. A duke offering honorable refuge. A marriage based on mutual respect and shared purpose. Character witnesses testified. Lady Pemberton spoke of Amelia's grace and propriety. Hollis described her work ethic and integrity. The vicar confirmed Thomas's happiness and well-being. But Gerald's solicitor was skilled. He pressed each witness, creating doubt where there had been certainty, suggesting calculation where there had been desperation. Then Gerald himself took the stand. He spoke with wounded dignity about his concern for Thomas, his deceased brother's only son. About Amelia's refusal to communicate, her flight from family support, her choices that put the child in uncertain circumstances. "I simply want what's best for my nephew," Gerald said, his voice thick with false emotion. "To ensure he's raised in a stable, proper environment. Not as a pawn in a convenient arrangement between desperate strangers." "Mr. Crane," Lord Ashworth interjected, "do you have evidence that the child is being mistreated or neglected?" "I have evidence of questionable judgment, your lordship." A marriage of suspicious haste, an estate in financial ruin, a mother who abandoned family without cause. The cause, Amelia's voice rang out clear and sharp, was you. The courtroom went silent. Lord Ashworth frowned. Your Grace, you'll have opportunity to testify. No, she should speak now, Gerald said smoothly. Let's hear her explanation. Mr. Bellamy looked alarmed, but Amelia was already standing. Dominic wanted to stop her, but something in her expression told him this was necessary. You want to know why I left? Amelia faced Gerald directly. Because my son was terrified of you. Because you looked at him in ways that made my skin crawl. Because after my husband died, you came to our home and suggested I needed protection and guidance that involved my sharing your quarters while Thomas was sent away to school. Her voice didn't waver. You made me feel unsafe in my own home, Mr. Crane. And when a mother feels her child is threatened, she runs. That's not instability. That's survival. Gerald's mask slipped for just a moment, a flash of rage before the concerned expression returned. These are serious accusations with no proof. Your lordship, you see the pattern? Irrational claims, emotional outbursts. Did you or did you not suggest Mrs. Crane share your living quarters? Lord Ashworth asked sharply. I offered assistance during her mourning period. She misconstrued. Did you suggest sending Thomas away to school while she remained in your care? Gerald hesitated, his solicitor whispering urgently. I suggested educational opportunities that would benefit the boy, while separating him from his mother. Lord Ashworth made a note. Continue, Your Grace. Amelia's hands trembled, but her voice held steady. I fled because staying meant submitting to his control or losing my son. When I arrived at Greymont, I expected nothing. His Grace offered shelter in exchange for work, honorable, proper work. I repaired his home. We developed respect. When Mr. Crane threatened legal action, we married to protect Thomas legally. Not because I seduced him, but because we both understood what needed to be done. And you love your son? Lord Ashworth asked. More than my own life. Your Grace, the magistrate turned to Dominic, do you feel you were coerced or manipulated into this marriage? Dominic stood. No, Your Lordship. I entered freely, with full understanding of circumstances. And the child? You've accepted responsibility for his welfare? Completely. Thomas is my son in every way that matters. Lord Ashworth studied them for a long moment. Then he looked at Gerald, whose composure was cracking at the edges. Mr. Crane, I'm troubled by your testimony. If, as the Duchess suggests, you made inappropriate advances or suggestions. She's lying to protect her position. Then why did she run at all? The magistrate's voice was cold. If your intentions were purely avuncular, why flee in secret? Why this fear? He shuffled his papers. I've reviewed the testimonies. I've observed the parties involved. And I find no evidence that Thomas Crane is anything but happy, healthy, and properly cared for in his current situation. The courtroom was smaller than Dominic expected, paneled in dark wood that absorbed light and sound. Gerald sat with his solicitor, impeccably dressed, his expression one of concerned civility. The magistrate, Lord Ashworth, elderly and severe, reviewed documents with methodical precision. Amelia sat beside Dominic, her spine rigid, her hands folded so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Thomas waited outside with Lady Pemberton, who'd agreed to supervise him during the proceedings. All rise for the Honorable Lord Ashworth. The formalities began. Gerald's solicitor spoke first, painting a picture of a desperate widow who'd fled with a child, seduced a vulnerable duke, and engineered a hasty marriage to avoid legitimate guardianship claims. The words were careful, legally precise, devastating in their implications. Mrs. Crane, pardon the Duchess, has shown a pattern of instability and poor judgment. She abandoned her late husband's family without notice, taking the child in the dead of night. She imposed herself upon His Grace at his most vulnerable, living unchaperoned for weeks before a suspiciously hasty marriage. We must ask, was this truly in the child's best interest, or merely the desperate act of a woman securing her own position? Dominic felt Amelia flinch beside him. He reached for her hand under the table, holding it firmly. When it was their turn, their solicitor, Mr. Bellamy, recommended by Lady Pemberton, presented a different narrative. A widow seeking safety from an uncomfortable situation. A duke offering honorable refuge. A marriage based on mutual respect and shared purpose. Character witnesses testified. Lady Pemberton spoke of Amelia's grace and propriety. Hollis described her work ethic and integrity. The vicar confirmed Thomas's happiness and well-being. But Gerald's solicitor was skilled. He pressed each witness, creating doubt where there had been certainty, suggesting calculation where there had been desperation. Then Gerald himself took the stand. He spoke with wounded dignity about his concern for Thomas, his deceased brother's only son. About Amelia's refusal to communicate, her flight from family support, her choices that put the child in uncertain circumstances. "I simply want what's best for my nephew," Gerald said, his voice thick with false emotion. "To ensure he's raised in a stable, proper environment. Not as a pawn in a convenient arrangement between desperate strangers." "Mr. Crane," Lord Ashworth interjected, "do you have evidence that the child is being mistreated or neglected?" "I have evidence of questionable judgment, your lordship. A marriage of suspicious haste, an estate in financial ruin, a mother who abandoned family without cause." "The cause," Amelia's voice rang out clear and sharp, "was you." The courtroom went silent. Lord Ashworth frowned. "Your Grace, you'll have opportunity to testify." "No, she should speak now," Gerald said smoothly. "Let's hear her explanation." Mr. Bellamy looked alarmed, but Amelia was already standing. Dominic wanted to stop her, but something in her expression told him this was necessary. "You want to know why I left?" Amelia faced Gerald directly. "Because my son was terrified of you. Because you looked at him in ways that made my skin crawl. Because after my husband died, you came to our home and suggested I needed protection and guidance that involved my sharing your quarters while Thomas was sent away to school." Her voice didn't waver. "You made me feel unsafe in my own home, Mr. Crane. And when a mother feels her child is threatened, she runs. That's not instability. That's survival." Gerald's mask slipped for just a moment, a flash of rage before the concerned expression returned. "These are serious accusations with no proof. Your lordship, you see the pattern? Irrational claims, emotional outbursts. Did you or did you not suggest Mrs. Crane share your living quarters?" Lord Ashworth asked sharply. "I offered assistance during her mourning period." She misconstrued. "Did you suggest sending Thomas away to school while she remained in your care?" Gerald hesitated, his solicitor whispering urgently. "I suggested educational opportunities that would benefit the boy, while separating him from his mother." Lord Ashworth made a note. "Continue, your Grace." Amelia's hands trembled, but her voice held steady. "I fled because staying meant submitting to his control or losing my son. When I arrived at Greymont, I expected nothing. His Grace offered shelter in exchange for work, honorable, proper work. I repaired his home. We developed respect. When Mr. Crane threatened legal action, we married to protect Thomas legally. Not because I seduced him, but because we both understood what needed to be done." "And you love your son?" Lord Ashworth asked. "More than my own life." "Your Grace," the magistrate turned to Dominic, "do you feel you were coerced or manipulated into this marriage?" Dominic stood. "No, your lordship. I entered freely, with full understanding of circumstances." "And the child? You've accepted responsibility for his welfare?" "Completely. Thomas is my son in every way that matters." Lord Ashworth studied them for a long moment. Then he looked at Gerald, whose composure was cracking at the edges. "Mr. Crane, I'm troubled by your testimony. If, as the Duchess suggests, you made inappropriate advances or suggestions. She's lying to protect her position. Then why did she run at all?" The magistrate's voice was cold. "If your intentions were purely avuncular, why flee in secret? Why this fear?" He shuffled his papers. "I've reviewed the testimonies. I've observed the parties involved. And I find no evidence that Thomas Crane is anything but happy, healthy, and properly cared for in his current situation." Gerald's face went white. "Your lordship. Furthermore, I find the marriage between their graces to be legitimate and entered into freely. Mr. Crane, your petition is denied. The Duke and Duchess of Greymont retain full guardianship and parental rights. You are to cease all contact with the child and his mother unless explicitly invited." The gavel struck. Final. Absolute. Gerald stood frozen, his careful plans crumbling. Then his eyes met Amelia's and there was pure hatred in them. "This isn't over," he said quietly. "Yes," Dominic said, stepping between them, "it is. If you approach my family again, I'll pursue charges for harassment and attempted coercion. Am I clear?" Gerald said nothing. But as he left the courtroom, his shoulders were rigid with barely contained fury. Outside, Lady Pemberton waited with Thomas, who launched himself at Amelia the moment he saw her. "Mama?" She caught him, holding tight, tears finally spilling over. "It's done, darling. We're safe." We're really safe. Dominic stood slightly apart, watching them. Victory felt strange, not triumphant but quietly profound. They'd faced the worst and survived. Together. Lady Pemberton touched his arm. Well done, Your Grace. Both of you. Thank you. For everything. Thank me by making that marriage real, she said quietly. I've watched you both these weeks. You care for each other whether you admit it or not. Don't waste that because it started from necessity. She departed before he could respond. Thomas tugged at Dominic's coat. Can we go home now? Real home, not London home. Yes, Dominic said, ruffling his hair. We can go home. Amelia looked at him over Thomas's head, her eyes bright with tears and relief and something else, something that might eventually become love. Home, she repeated softly. I like the sound of that. They walked together through London streets toward the townhouse, a family forged in crisis but choosing now to remain one. The battle was won. But the real work, building a life, a marriage, a future, was just beginning. 6 months later. Spring came to Greymont with a vengeance, wildflowers colonizing the neglected gardens, green pushing through every crack and crevice. The house stood stronger now, its bones repaired, its rooms gradually filling with furniture, warmth, life. Amelia stood in the library, surveying the completed shelves. Empty still, books were expensive, and the estate's finances remained precarious, but solid. Beautiful. A promise of what could be. Mama, look. Thomas burst through the door, muddy from the gardens, holding a frog. Mr. Hollis says I can keep him if I build a proper home. Then you'd better start building, she said, smiling. Outside, please. Not in the library. He ran off, his laughter echoing through the halls. That sound, pure, unafraid, was worth everything they'd endured. He's going to track mud everywhere, Dominic's voice came from the doorway. Amelia turned. Her husband, still strange to think of him that way, leaned against the frame, shirt sleeves rolled up, hair disheveled from a morning spent working the tenant farms. He looked nothing like a duke and everything like someone who belonged here. Let him, she said. Mud washes off. Childhood doesn't come back. Dominic moved into the room, studying the shelves with satisfaction. We did good work here. We did. They stood side by side, the comfortable silence of two people who'd learned each other's rhythms. 6 months since the hearing. 6 months of rebuilding, not just the estate but themselves. It hadn't been simple. There were still arguments about money, about priorities, about the weight of expectations. There were still nights when Dominic woke gasping from nightmares of war, and Amelia held him until the shaking stopped. Still moments when she froze at unexpected visitors, fear flickering across her face before she remembered they were safe. But slowly, carefully, they were becoming something more than a convenient arrangement. I received a letter from Lady Pemberton, Dominic said. She's invited us to her summer party. Asked specifically that we bring Thomas. Will you go? Will we go? He corrected. I don't make those decisions alone anymore. It was true. Somewhere along the way they'd stopped being two separate people cohabiting and become actual partners. She managed the household accounts, he handled tenant relations. She made decisions about Thomas's education. He enforced them. They consulted, compromised, occasionally fought, always reconciled. I think we should, Amelia said. Thomas needs to see that we're part of a community, that we're not hiding anymore. Neither are you. She smiled. Neither am I. That evening after Thomas was asleep, they sat in the drawing room, recently repaired, modestly furnished with pieces salvaged and restored. A fire crackled in the hearth. Outside, spring rain pattered against windows. I've been thinking, Amelia said, setting down her mending, about the estate's finances. Always a cheerful topic. I'm serious. We need sustainable income. The tenant farms are improving, but it's not enough. What if we open part of the house? Tours, perhaps, or let rooms to respectable travelers. The location is good and the history. Turn Greymont into a business? Dominic considered. My father would be appalled. Your father ran the estate into the ground. Perhaps it's time for new thinking. He laughed. You're probably right. Draft a proposal. We'll review it together. She nodded, then hesitated. Dominic? Can I ask you something? Always. Do you regret it? The marriage, the responsibility, all of this. He set down his book, giving her his full attention. Why would you ask that now? Because we're safe now. Gerald is gone, truly gone, his threats empty. We won the hearing, Thomas is legally yours. If you wanted to, Renegotiate our arrangement, I would understand. Renegotiate. He tasted the word. You mean separate? Annul? I mean give you the freedom you sacrificed for us. Dominic crossed to where she sat, kneeling so they were eye level. Amelia, I don't want freedom from this. From you. You say that now. I say it because it's true. He took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. When we married, it was tactical. Necessary. But somewhere in the past months it became real. At least for me. And if you're asking because you want out, I'll honor that. But if you're asking because you think I'm trapped. I'm not asking because I want out. Her voice was barely a whisper. I'm asking because I'm falling in love with you, and I don't know if that was part of our agreement. The words hung between them, fragile and enormous. Dominic felt something in his chest crack open, a warmth flooding through spaces that had been cold for years. It wasn't part of our agreement, he said slowly. But I'm not opposed to amendments. Amendments? I'm falling in love with you too. He said it like a confession, like a revelation. I don't know when it happened. Somewhere between the arguments and the repairs and the nights you held me through nightmares. Somewhere in watching you be the strongest person I've ever known while convinced you're weak. I felt Amelia. Completely. Tears spilled down her cheeks. This wasn't supposed to happen. I know. We were supposed to be practical. Sensible. Partners, not. We're still partners. Just partners who also happen to be in love. She laughed through her tears. That's inconvenient. Extremely. He brushed a tear away with his thumb. What do we do about it? I suppose. She leaned forward, her forehead touching his. We could try being married for real. Not just legally but actually. With all the messy feelings and complications that entails. That sounds terrifying. It does, doesn't it? Absolutely worth it though. And then, finally, 6 months after vows spoken in a cold church, they kissed. Soft at first, tentative, then deeper. A claim and a promise and a beginning all at once. When they pulled apart, Amelia was smiling. So, amendments to our original agreement. Complete revision, Dominic said. New contract. This marriage is now officially real. With all standard provisions? Love, honor, cherish. All of them. Plus a few custom clauses about tolerating each other's stubbornness and sharing household decisions. And staying even when it's hard. Especially then. She kissed him again, softer this time. Deal. Later they moved to the bedroom, their bedroom now not his with her in exile. They undressed each other slowly, mapping scars and stories with gentle hands. War wounds and work calluses, stretch marks and healing hurts. Bodies that had survived, that had fought and built and endured. When they came together, it was with the tenderness of people who understood fragility. Who knew how easily things broke and how precious it was when they didn't. Afterward, they lay tangled together, Amelia's head on Dominic's chest, his fingers tracing patterns on her shoulder. We're really doing this, she murmured. Building a life. A family. An actual future. Seems like it. It still feels impossible sometimes. Most worthwhile things do. She tilted her head to look at him. When did you become wise? When you taught me that survival isn't the same as living. He kissed her forehead. Thank you. For not giving up. On yourself, on Thomas, on me. Thank you for giving us a home when we had nowhere else to go. This is your home now. For as long as you want it. Forever then, she said softly. If you'll have us. Forever sounds perfect. Epilogue, 2 years later. The library was finally full of books. Some purchased, some donated, some salvaged from estate sales. Thomas, now 9, sat in the window seat reading, his frog tank nearby. The frog had been replaced 3 times, though he didn't know it. In the gardens, now professionally maintained thanks to the estate's recovered finances, Amelia walked with a small child. Their daughter, Catherine, named for the aunt who'd eventually accepted them with grudging approval. The baby babbled happily, reaching for flowers. Dominic watched them from his study window, still struck by the improbability of it all. 2 years ago he'd been a ghost haunting an empty house. Now he was a husband, a father, a man with purpose and future. The estate thrived. The tenant farms produced well. The house tours Amelia had proposed brought steady income and restored the Voss name to respectability, if not grandeur. They would never be wealthy, but they were stable. Secure. Happy. Thomas looked up from his book. Papa, what does indomitable mean? Papa. The word still filled Dominic with quiet wonder. It means unconquerable, he said. Impossible to defeat. Like Mama? Dominic smiled. Exactly like your mama. Through the window, Amelia looked up and caught his eye. She smiled, that real smile, the one that lit her entire face, and waved. He waved back. Indomitable indeed. Both of them. They'd started with nothing but necessity and desperation. They'd built a marriage from convenience, a family from crisis, a home from ruins. And somewhere in that building, they'd found something neither had dared hope for. Well, real, complicated, hard-won, and absolutely worth every sacrifice. Outside, spring blossomed. Inside, a family flourished. Anne Graymont House, once a monument to grief and failure, stood strong, filled with laughter, purpose, and the quiet joy of people who'd survived the worst and chosen, every day, to build something better.